What's the most disturbing unsolved crime you've ever heard of? The one that still haunts you. Story 1. Local case that surprisingly didn't make much news outside of the immediate area. In 1997, concerned neighbors noticed mail had piled up on the porch of a 76-year-old reclusive retiree. She had no family, no known friends, and was rarely seen outside of her home aside from occasional bingo nights at church. Concerned by the increasing accumulation of mail, police were contacted for a wellness check. The doors and windows were locked from the inside with no signs of a disturbance. Inside the home, the first and second floors were cluttered but ultimately bore no signs of a struggle. Inside the basement, however, told another story. The body of Mrs. Evans was found under a tarp in the middle of the floor. Items from the basement were piled on top of her. Her body had been harmed, and some internal organs and parts of her limbs were missing. Police noted that the harm was an intentional act made by a knife, and not the result of animal activity or natural decay. She had no pets. The basement was sealed like the rest of the house, and bore no signs of forced entry. Her cause of death was ruled a homicide by manual strangulation, and her case quickly went cold. In 2015, her case was reopened by local police, who changed her cause of death from homicide to accidental death, releasing a statement that the harm was the result of an alleged pet cat. However, neighbors who knew her stated she had never owned a cat, and that there was no plausible way for her to have accidentally placed herself under a tarp and covered herself up with large furniture and tools as she had been found. A retraction was made several months later, with police stating a review of crime scene photos indicated no presence of any pets. In 2016, a second inquiry was launched, and the case was again reopened. Her cause of death was once again listed as a homicide by strangulation. However, police released no additional information until that October. In October of 2016, a local handyman died. Shortly after, local police named him a lead suspect in the homicide of Mrs. Evans. Two men who worked with the deceased handyman issued statements after his death that accused him of being responsible for the crime. The allegations state that the handyman and both accusers had done work on the home prior to the woman's death. Upon completion of the work, Mrs. Evans was unable to pay the workers, and in retaliation, the now deceased man strangled her to death, hid her body, and swore his co-workers to secrecy. Fearful of the man, the other two workers did not report anything until after his death. The case was closed abruptly, and no charges were ever filed, with the police releasing a statement that the men's stories lined up with information on the case that was not and will not be released. Many in the local area believe this to be a cover-up in order for the police to call the case closed. Some have pointed out inconsistencies in the originally released case info, the 2015 incident attempting to change the cause of death, and now the mysterious handyman theory. Remaining neighbors who remembered Mrs. Evans are divided on if work was actually being done on the home prior to her death, with some saying they think they remember seeing a work truck and others stating the woman was not financially stable and thus would not have been able to make needed repairs. The home was demolished in 1999, taking all remaining physical evidence with it. Unfortunately, the truth died with Mrs. Evans. With the lead suspect deceased, the co-conspirators left unnamed, a lack of family or friends willing to fight for answers, and the police's refusal to disclose more information, we will never know what really happened to the 76-year-old recluse who enjoyed bingo and was found harmed in her own basement. The case has always bothered me. The town has an established history of police corruption, and there are many rumors of police involvement in her death, and several others from around the same time. Justice was never served, and while the case is considered closed, it only creates more questions than it ever answered. Story 2. The disappearance of Olivia Martin shattered my entire island, and we are all still looking for answers and an opportunity to bring her home to reunite or to rest in peace. It's 2002, and 21-year-old Olivia was at the Jungle Exotic Cabaret Club downtown for her best friend Jordan Bailey's 21st birthday. She had worked at the club for nearly 3 years and was well known there. A young man was parked outside in a dark red Jaguar and offered the group a lift to a house party. They party for some time. Olivia, a vegetarian, gets hungry and can't find food that fits her diet at the party. The man with the Jaguar, Alex Reed, offers to give her a ride to a gas station, convenience store, or fast food place to pick up a snack. After some persuading, she goes with him. She contacts Jordan in the wee hours. His account stated that he told him the man wouldn't let her leave, and they are at a house she isn't familiar with on Bowen Road, which has hundreds of residential houses and commercial buildings. She wants to go and is super uncomfortable, and Alex will not drive her back. When she placed her last phone call, but nobody knew that part yet. Everything was so hush-hush in the investigation that Olivia's family doubled down on the police, thinking that nothing was happening. They might have been right, because Olivia is still not home. It left a gaping maw in the community. Updates happen in the media. A vigil is still held for her to come home, and the Lights On for Olivia movement still happens yearly, with residents leaving porch lights and candles in the window on the anniversary of her disappearance to show that she is still missed and wanted home. This case haunts me because of how close it hits to home, literally. I grew up in the area, and the thought that someone could just vanish like that, with so many loose ends and suspicions, is terrifying. The lack of closure for her family is heartbreaking. Story 3. In the early spring of 2004, 17 years old, Jessica Miller was working hard to move forward in life. She had a job at a local restaurant and was working towards getting her GED, General Educational Development. She had even discussed plans of attending college in the near future. Tragically, her disappearance on March 19, 2004 would bring all of this to a halt. Background: on October 18, 1986, Jessica Miller was born to her parents Ben and Karen in Burlington, Vermont. She spent her childhood growing up on a farm in East Franklin, Vermont, with her parents and older brother. By all accounts, she had a normal and happy childhood. In her youth, she took a fair amount of martial arts training, specifically jiu-jitsu. It was on her 17th birthday that Jessica decided she wanted some independence in her life and decided to move away from her family home and go to live closer to her friends. However, this change in lifestyle led to some issues with school, subsequently causing her to drop out of high school in February 2004, months before graduating. However, being an ambitious woman, Jessica soon enrolled in a GED program to get her high school diploma. Also by this point, Jessica was living in Sheldon, VT, Vermont, with a close friend of hers, a town about 20 miles from her job at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery, VT. About 3 weeks before she were to disappear, Jessica attended a house party. It was at this party that she was attacked by a former friend, a girl by the name of Sarah Ross. The attack was so violent that it left Jessica with a broken nose and a concussion. While the exact cause of the attack is unknown, it has been speculated that it was caused by Sarah's jealousy over Jessica's interactions with a boy at the party. Given the nature of her injuries, Jessica would choose to press charges against her former friend. However, these charges would never proceed as Jessica would go missing just 3 weeks later. It is worth noting that Sarah herself was later cleared of any involvement in Jessica's disappearance, though it's not clear how thoroughly she was investigated. Timeline of Jessica's disappearance: March 19, 2004, sometime in the morning. Jessica Miller takes her exam to receive her GED. Sometime around noon, Jessica and her mother celebrate her accomplishment by going out for lunch. Her mother would later describe her as being happy and looking forward to the future. That afternoon, Jessica and her mother do some shopping and run some errands together. At one point while waiting in line at a store, something seemingly catches Jessica's eye outside the store, and she excuses herself for a moment to go see to it. When her mother met up with her in the parking lot of the store a few minutes later, she is described as being agitated and unnerved, worried but not wanting to pry. Jessica's mother does not ask her daughter what happened or who or what she saw outside the store. Between 3:30 p.m. and 4 p.m., Jessica's mother drops her off at the home Jessica is staying at, so that she may get ready for her shift at the Black Lantern Inn. Before leaving for work, Jessica leaves her roommate a note saying she will be home after work. Jessica then hops in her 1985 Oldsmobile sedan, registered to her mother, and departs for work. 11:20 p.m. Jessica has completed her shift, clocks out, and leaves the restaurant. According to all who saw her leave, Jessica was alone in her vehicle as she drove off from the restaurant. March 20, 2004. Early morning. A Vermont state trooper discovers Jessica's vehicle backed into the side of a rundown house on Route 118 in Richfield, VT, about 1.5 miles from the Black Lantern Inn. The wooden siding of the house had been broken and breached by the back end of the sedan. Amount the items found at the scene: 2 of Jessica's paychecks in the front seat of the car, loose change, an unused cigarette, and a water bottle were found on the outside of the car. Believing the vehicle had simply been left there by a drunk driver, The trooper had the car towed to a local vehicle garage. A variety of unfortunate circumstances led to it being a few days before Jessica Miller would be reported missing. Her roommate saw the note she left on Friday night, left for a weekend away, and returned on Monday to find that Jessica was nowhere to be found. However, she assumed Jessica was simply staying with a friend or family, and so she did not report her missing. It wasn't until March 23rd that Jessica's parents were notified by her roommate that she was missing. They immediately reported her disappearance to the police. The investigation into Jessica's disappearance has been fraught with issues from the start. The state trooper who found her car did not report it to the police department handling missing persons cases, and the garage where the car was towed did not notify authorities either. It wasn't until Jessica's parents went to the garage themselves that they found her car. By that time, the crime scene had been contaminated by curious locals who had heard about the bizarre crash and came to see it for themselves. Theories and leads. Over the years, several theories have been proposed as to what happened to Jessica Miller. One theory is that she was the victim of foul play related to the house party attack 3 weeks prior. However, as mentioned earlier, Sarah Ross was cleared of any involvement. Another theory is that Jessica was abducted by someone she knew or met that night. There have been rumors of involvement with illicit substances, with some suggesting that Jessica owed money to people supplying illicit substances and was killed over it. However, her family and friends have adamantly denied that Jessica was involved in illicit substances. A more recent lead came in 2016 when a woman came forward claiming that her former boyfriend and his friends had harmed Jessica and buried her body under a house in Berkshire VT. Police searched the area but found no evidence. To this day, Jessica Miller's disappearance remains unsolved. Her family continues to search for answers and hold out hope that one day they will know what happened to her. The eerie image of her car backed into the abandoned house still haunts those familiar with the case, a chilling reminder of the night she vanished. Story 4. This happened quite a long time ago, yet it is never too far from my mind. We continue to feel very lucky to have survived whatever might have happened. Read and tell me what you think. It was a long time ago, before cell phones were prevalent, and I was a mom in my early 30s who had just driven our kids to the pediatrician. The Macon, Georgia doctor's office was an hour away from our home, and I was just taking the 2 youngest of my 3, then ages 1 and 3 years old, to our scheduled appointment. Because we lived so far away, their office always gave us the last 2 appointments of the day, and we were grateful. The doctor had just built a new building off of a fresh spur of the highway, so the location was quite isolated in every direction, but a very nice facility compared to his old spot by the hospital there. His new building was also pretty far back on the new lot, and my car, a black Jeep Cherokee we had owned for 2 years, was one of only 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot when arrived. I parked near the front door, removed the kids from their car seats, and for the next hour or so we waited, then saw the doctor, paid, and finally exited back outside. Mine was the only car left in the lot as I loaded the children in their car seats for our trip home, but as the receptionist locked the front glass doors, my car somehow wouldn't start when I turned the key. There was just an odd clicking noise. Gathering the children once again, I knocked on the door until someone allowed us back in and asked to borrow their phone to call a nearby garage for service. I found one in the phone book, and the man said that he would come but that it might be a bit, so I told him my location, left to go back out to the car, rolled down all the windows, and loaded the children back into their seats once more as we waited. Soon we watched as all the lights were turned out in the building again, and everyone left, their cars departing one by one from behind the building somewhere, leaving us now completely alone in the parking lot. As it was still light, I spent a lot of that time trying to tend to the children, digging through our car for snacks and a bottle, making sure that they weren't getting too hot, etc. Although the service station attendant said that it was probably going to be quite a while, I was pleasantly surprised when a truck pulled into the empty parking lot pretty soon, and a man got out of his pickup, smiled and nodded to me, and said he was going to raise the hood. He was middle-aged and a bit scruffy, but quite frankly, many gas station attendants sometimes looked that way, especially at the end of the day, and I was grateful when he began doing something under the hood almost immediately. I sat down again in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for him to tell me to try the engine, but he seemed to be taking a long time checking the connections, and I longed for him to just grab jumper cables, yet he never did. Without getting out of the car, I asked him what he thought was wrong, and he said, "Oh, it's just a loose wire, not the battery," and continued whatever he was doing. I couldn't see his face at all from where I was sitting, but his hands were slightly visible through that long, horizontal slit between the windshield and the raised hood as we waited. More than once, he said that it was merely a loose wire, and if I would just come up here really quick, he would show me which one it was, so it would never happen again. I remember kind of smiling and shaking my head, saying that sadly there was no reason to show me anything, as I didn't know anything about cars. I just thanked him and continued to stay in the driver's seat, again just waiting for the inevitable signal to try to start the ignition that was most surely coming any moment. At one point I remember thinking that he was definitely flirting as he spoke, but I was trying above all to be polite and kind, as he was indeed helping us. We were hot and tired and miserable, and truthfully I was distracted with the kids. Oddly enough, he was starting to sound a little frustrated with me, because I wouldn't come up and look at the engine. I remember thinking that I certainly didn't want to make him mad where he left us there all alone and stranded, so I was being super nice. Finally, I got out of the car, but with the open door between us, I stood right there and told him that it was okay, that I really didn't need to see the wire, that I trusted him, and that I just wanted to get the kids home. He kept insisting, and I kept smiling and shaking my head, but he was now starting to sound a little angry, and I was getting worried. This went on for a few more minutes, and I remember thinking that it was really odd that he hadn't asked me to start the engine, or even used jumper cables. He just kept fiddling with something under the hood. Then, suddenly, the man slammed the hood down hard, got in his truck, and drove away without saying a word. I was stunned. He had left us there alone, and the car still wouldn't start. I sat there for a few minutes, wondering what to do. The children were crying, and I was scared. Then, another truck pulled in. This time, it was the real service station attendant. He got out, raised the hood, and immediately said, "Ma'am, your battery cables have been loosened." He tightened them, and the car started right up. I thanked him profusely and drove home, but the incident has haunted me ever since. What was the first man's intention? Why did he loosen the cables instead of fixing them? Was he trying to lure me out of the car for some sinister reason? I'll never know, but I'm grateful I didn't get out to see the wire. Story 5. Peter Fisher. Saw this on Unsolved Mysteries a month ago, and I haven't stopped thinking about it. It took place in June of 1988. Peter was en route from his home in Anchorage, Alaska, to Evergreen College in Washington to begin a pre-med course. He packed his car with all of his possessions and 2 guns that were ultimately confiscated by Canadian Border Patrol. This caused a 1-day delay in his trip, but he was back on the road again. 600 miles south of the checkpoint, still in Canada, a hitchhiker was dropped off at a rest stop cafe. The owner, Grace Foster, and her daughter Tara were working. The hitchhiker sat and had a meal and paid in Canadian currency. Grace and Tara felt something was off about the hitchhiker. Tara thought perhaps the hitchhiker was recently released from a mental institution. Peter Fisher pulls into this rest stop. Grace and Tara watched the hitchhiker approach Peter and ask for a ride. Peter initially said no, but the hitchhiker persisted, and Peter eventually agreed. They drove off together. The next day, a man driving Peter's car pulled into a motel in Washington. He checked in under Peter's name and paid in cash. The motel owner said the man was acting strange and seemed nervous. The next morning, the man left the motel and was never seen again. Peter's car was found abandoned in a car wash in Seattle a few days later. Peter's body was found in a remote area off the highway in Canada, about 100 miles from the rest stop. He had been shot multiple times. The hitchhiker was never identified, and the case remains unsolved. What bothers me is how the killer assumed Peter's identity so seamlessly, and why he chose to drive all the way to Washington before disappearing. It's like he had a plan all along. Story 6. The Duncan Graffin, aka the Dark Countess. I'm not an expert on this case, but I find it fascinating. The Dark Countess was a wealthy noblewoman in the early 19th century in Germany. She was mysterious and reclusive, and always wore a veil when she went out to cover her face. Though, it does seem that some people did see her face, and some people did know what she looked like. She was always accompanied by a man who called himself the Count Victor, but they were not married or in a romantic relationship, despite living in the same castle. When the Countess died in 1837, at around 60 years old, she was very quickly buried. The Count, who was in fact a Dutch man named Leo van der Meer, who had been a secretary at the Dutch embassy in Paris, said her real name was Sophia Rossi, and she was from Westphalia, but this could not be verified, as the records from Westphalia had no reference to any Sophia Rossi, and this was likely not her real name. And even if it was, it does not explain who she was or shed any light on her life and how and why she lived the way she did. There were rumors that the Dark Countess was actually Princess Marie, the daughter of Queen Marie and King Louis. Princess Marie was the only member of the immediate royal family to survive the French Revolution. She was imprisoned with her family, and after her parents and brother died, she was released and sent to Austria. However, there were rumors that the real Princess Marie had died in prison, and that the woman who was released was a substitute. The Dark Countess bore a striking resemblance to Queen Marie, and her age matched what Princess Marie's would have been. The Count's behavior after her death was odd. He had her buried quickly and without much ceremony, and he destroyed many of her personal papers. He lived another 8 years after her death, and when he died, more documents were found that hinted at her true identity, but nothing conclusive. In 2012, her remains were exhumed and deoxyribonucleic acid tested, but the results were inconclusive due to degradation. The mystery of who she really was remains unsolved, and it's haunting because it ties into one of history's most tragic royal families. Story 7. Robert Evans, a high school student in the 1980s who seemingly disappeared right out of his high school one winter morning. He was last seen at his locker at 8:30 a.m. by another student. That was the last time anyone saw or heard from Robert, and he's never been found in the years since. A brief summary of the case from the Charlie Project gives the basic details of disappearance. Robert was a student at Cedar Edge High School, south of Cedar Edge, Colorado on Highway 65 on February 10, 1981. He rode the bus to school as usual that day, and the boy who shared his locker saw him place his books inside it at 8:30 a.m. Robert did not attend classes that day and has not been heard from again. His mother told investigators her son carried only an orange or yellow backpack full of school books and his wallet, with his driver's license and $3 in cash, when he was last seen. He left behind all his clothing, his car, his motorcycle, his skis, and money in his bank account. Authorities suspect foul play was involved in Robert's disappearance. They believe he was killed shortly after he vanished, probably by someone he knew. He was a popular straight-A student, and he had already been accepted at Western State College in Gunnison, Colorado, and had selected a dormitory room. He was also an avid skier who was looking forward to an upcoming ski race, scheduled for the weekend after he vanished. His family reported he had been acting oddly in the month prior to his disappearance and appeared to be preoccupied, but he has no history of runaway behavior, and his parents never believed he ran away from home. One of Robert's teachers, John Price, is considered a person of interest in his disappearance. He taught social studies and coached wrestling at Cedar Ridge High School. After Robert's disappearance, John went to Robert's mother and told her son had a lot of personal problems and was suicidal. None of Robert's loved ones believed this. His coach said he was in good spirits before he disappeared and would never have taken his own life. Robert did visit John's home on a regular basis to turn in his homework. It was right next to Cedar Ridge High School. In 1994, a former classmate of Robert's said his body might be buried at the house where John lived in 1981. John had sold it in 1984 and moved away. Authorities searched the house with ground-penetrating radar and saw some anomalies, including 2 under the concrete garage floor, but they decided not to dig. Robert's case remains unsolved. Both of his parents are now deceased. Story 8. This has been asked before, but I always love the conversations on threads like this. Which true crime cases haunt you the most? Murders, missing people, or Jane/John does, etc. Which ones have you spent sleepless nights over looking at theories, or have you ever changed your lifestyle because of a particular case? For me personally, it has to be the harming of the Miller women. It is one of the most horrifying cases I've ever come across. A mother and her teenage daughters were harmed by Oscar Clark on their first ever vacation to Florida. The husband and father, Harry Miller, couldn't go because he had to look after their dairy farm, so he lost his wife and daughters all at once. This case is so personal to me because I first watched it during a rerun of Unsolved Mysteries in a motel room while on vacation in Florida with my mother and sister when I was 14 years old. It gave me the chills because I remember so clearly thinking, at that moment in time, the Miller family were just like us, since it was also our very first vacation. It has just stuck with me ever since. Here's a link to an amazing long-form article about the Miller women. So what are the cases haunt you? Links are appreciated. Story 9. I've commented about this before on this sub, but it's still the first answer that comes to mind when I see these questions. Cases like East Area Rapist / Original Night Stalker, The Night Stalker. Others where someone breaks into an occupied home and spend considerable time in the house. I've experienced a similar home intrusion, where I woke up and found a man beside my bed looking down at me. He ran when I realized I had woken up, and I chased him out before losing him so I wasn't physically harmed, but once the adrenaline wore off I was freaked out, which only got worse as the police investigated. He'd tampered with the lock to the door that opened out to the street. He entered through that door and spent time in the apartment before I woke up. When I chased him out, he ran past that open door to the door that opened into the communal stairwell which he'd already opened for himself. We never used it. Nobody in the building really used them. There was no hesitation. He's clearly planned to leave that way all along, and he'd spent long enough in the apartment to know how to get to the door without running into anything. You could not see that door from either my room or the door he entered through. The police concluded that I had likely been the target and had inadvertently saved myself by waking up and leaping out of bed. All he stole was my phone and camera, even though there were cash, credit cards, jewelry, and other valuables really accessible. I was incredibly lucky, but have some idea of the terror other victims went through. Your home is meant to be where you feel safest. Story 10. For me, it has to be most of the details behind the disappearance of 5-year-old Amy Walker from San Mateo County, California. From the Charlie Project. There is speculation that Amy's biological father, George Walker, was involved in her disappearance. George, a doctor, began behaving erratically after Amy's birth and was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. His family refused to have him committed to a mental hospital, however, as this would have caused him to lose his license to practice medicine. George had a relationship with another, older man, who called himself George Blake. Amy's family believes this name was an alias. They describe Blake as a manipulative man who exercised a cult of personality over Amy's father, which led to his divorce from Amy's mother. George moved into a cheap hotel in San Francisco, California, with Blake after the divorce, although, as a practicing physician from a wealthy family, he could have afforded better lodgings. He supported Blake financially and reportedly did not make any decisions without consulting him. Blake was interested in Amy and believed her to be the reincarnation of a woman he had lived with. He made Amy's mother legally change her daughter's name, adding the word Ivy as Amy's middle name. The word apparently has no meaning. Blake merely wanted the letters added to Amy's name so her name would numerologically add up to his own name. George never contacted his ex-wife after Amy's disappearance to offer sympathy or ask for updates on the case. His only known reaction to his daughter's abduction was to ask his attorney if he could discontinue his child support payments. Blake died of cancer in December 1981. His death certificate showed no birth date, no known relatives, and no social security number. After Blake's death, George destroyed most of the papers relating to himself, Blake, and Amy, except those which were stored in a safe deposit box. Approximately 2 weeks after Blake died, George committed suicide by drinking poison in his hotel room. His exact date of death is unknown, as his body was not discovered for about a week. Quote, police investigated Amy's father and Blake but found no evidence that they were involved in Amy's disappearance, despite their strange behavior. Amy is still missing, and she would be 55 if she is still alive today. Amy's case is just so haunting to me. Who was Blake and why did he seem to have such a hold over Amy's father? And the fact that he had no birth certificate and no social security number. Just what was going on there and what happened to Amy? Story 11. 11-year-old Megan Brown was there 1 second, then the next she's gone for good. Her and her sister went to go get ice cream. After hearing an ice cream truck, her sister decided to go back into their house to get a jacket, and when her sister returns, Megan's bike is lying on the ground, a tire still spinning, and the change Megan had for an ice cream lying next to it. There were no signs of a struggle. No one heard her cry out for help. She was just gone in about 90 seconds. That was 24 years ago, and there's never been another sign of her. No body, no note, and no official suspects except for one man currently in prison whom her family is very suspicious of. Some sick person decided to have some fun at her family's expense by misspelling her name on a dollar bill to make it look like she survived the kidnapping. She was a year younger than me and disappeared about 5 minutes away from where I was living, so this one has haunted my home city all this time because she just vanished into thin air near her home. I feel so bad for her sister, who spent years blaming herself for going back inside. Story 12. My pet case will always be Jacob Jenkins. It bothers me that a 6'1" man disappears in broad daylight within a 15-minute window, and nobody sees a thing. I've done a lot of research on it, even finding Sam Shaw, another missing man from Omaha around the same time, just to rule out a connection. But the thing that truly bothers me the most about Jacob's case is just the fact that even before this he had a rough go. He was bullied in school, had to leave college due to financial issues, and dealt with cognitive issues. I remember his mother posting a story about how when he was born he was really sick in the hospital and had to be isolated for his first week. The guy literally suffered on day one and presumably suffered on his last day with absolutely no justice given. Story 13. Pocatello, Idaho. From 1978 to 1983, there were 4 preteen and teenage girls from Pocatello, Idaho, Tina Andrews, Patricia Clark, Linda Scott, my sister, and Cindy Baker, that were all kidnapped, harmed, and remains found later, varied times, not to mention a 5th girl still unidentified whose remains were found along with the first 2 girls. There are still unsolved cold cases. The police at the time completely botched the investigations of all 3. The first 3, including my sister's case, are thought to have been committed by people who team in the same circle or knew each other, whereas the 4th, Baker, is said to be a random act. Story 14. Laura Spencer and Moira Morgan's disappearances are both ones that I find extremely disturbing. The one that gives me the most chills, though, is the Pinnacle Lake incidents in 2006, mostly because my former landlord was the husband and father of the victims, and I was renting from him when they were harmed. Story 15. Holly Miller at Mildenhall, Suffolk, UK, United Kingdom in 1952. A little-known case I only came across this year. My grandparents vaguely mentioned some incident occurring locally during the war, possibly committed by a United States serviceman. I thought it might have been a WAAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, called Fiona Clark, who was found drowned in suspicious circumstances 1945, just before VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. She was riding on her bicycle home when she was attacked, dragged into a field and beaten and strangled with bare hands. She was also apparently robbed. Thousands of U.S. servicemen from Lakenheath and Mildenhall were examined for cuts and scratches, but a large group had been sent home literally the day before, so if her attacker was an American, he got away. The police, however, suspected it was an unknown local man. No one was ever charged. It's not listed among Suffolk Constabulary's unsolved cases. What's weird is, despite living in the area my whole life and driving along that road many times, I'd never heard of it. I found more information on the British Newspaper Archive. There are lots of old and poorly known cold cases on there. We worry about violence now, but when you're reading about Story 16. I've seen a few posts that ask for people to reply with stuff with this, but usually everyone's replies are fairly common cases. I'd like to know what ones you found disturbing that never get mentioned or don't get mentioned enough. The one that stuck with me was the death of Anna Benson. Everything about this case is weird, and with people being strange and helping this poor family find out what happened to their daughter/sister. Story 17. Alex Smith from London. His disappearance was very similar to Andrew Green's. Alex was 16 years old at his disappearance, not far from Andrew. Both seemingly vanished off the face of the earth just outside London. It is not fully clear if either boy can be considered a runaway, or if they were lured. Alex went missing 10 months after Andrew. There were reported sightings of Alex for a few years after he went missing. I don't know if the police consider them reliable. A link between the 2 cases is unproven and unlikely, but they are eerily similar. Alicia Evans from Glendale, Arizona. Absolutely chilling story. Alicia is an autistic teenage girl missing since September 15, 2019. She looks much younger than her age. She was 14 years old at age of her disappearance. Her mom had reported to police at least instance of a predator trying to get personal information from her online. Alicia left home very early one morning, having climbed over a backyard fence, and left a note. "I ran away. I will be back. I swear. I'm sorry." She hasn't been seen since, and she took her laptop with her, terrifying who she could have met up with or what could have happened. This is a recent case I'd really like to see more reports on. Her family must be in so much pain. She is so young and had specific medical needs, and now we are in this pandemic. It's just heart-wrenching. If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary